Hi, I'm Emery Grant. Last weekend at a family BBQ, my parents looked me dead in the eye and said they would suspend my schooling until I apologized to their beloved golden boy, my older brother. One minute the adults were chatting, and the next everyone was staring at me like I was on trial. My dad claimed I'd embarrassed the family. My mom insisted I had to apologize publicly to protect my brother's reputation, and my brother, arms crossed, smirking like he'd already won, didn't even pretend to stay out of it. Then my dad delivered the line he clearly thought would break me. "If you don't apologize, you're staying home. No school, no privileges." They expected me to panic, to fold, to act like the child they could corner whenever they needed someone to blame. Instead, I said two words they never imagined hearing from me: "Go ahead." The entire table went silent. My mom blinked like she misheard. My dad froze mid-breath. And my brother actually laughed, confident I'd cave the moment things got real. But I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked away, while half the relatives watched as if they couldn't believe I'd just talked back to the family golden boy. Moments like that stay with you. Some of you probably know exactly what that feels like. If you want to see what happened when they realized I wasn't bluffing, keep watching because everything unraveled faster than they expected. Morning light slid through the hallway windows when I pushed open the school doors earlier than usual, stepping into the kind of silence that only existed before first bell. I walked straight to my locker, entered the combination, and pulled it open to reveal nothing but a hollow echo. Every shelf was empty, wiped clean the night before the lock even polished, as if I were prepping it for someone else to use. I stood there for a moment, not admiring it, but confirming that the message would speak for itself. While adjusting the strap of my backpack, I heard the unmistakable rhythm of Nolan's stride approaching from behind, steady, loud, self-assured, the walk of someone who thought he'd already won. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The moment he reached my row, his steps faltered. Then he stopped completely. I caught the shift in his breathing before I even looked at him. Nolan's eyes were fixed on the locker interior, scanning the empty space as though something invisible might explain it for him. His confidence wavered just enough to reveal the first crack. He opened his mouth slightly, shut it, then took half a step closer like he wasn't sure whether to confront me or retreat. The silence dragged longer than he expected, and that alone unsettled him. I closed the locker door with a controlled, quiet click. No theatrics, no rush, just finality. The noise seemed to jab at him harder than any argument. Before Nolan could speak, the office door opened across the hallway. Ms. Collins stepped out, balancing a handful of folders. She glanced at me, offered a polite nod, and said, "Your paperwork went through first thing this morning. Everything's been forwarded and confirmed." Her tone wasn't dramatic, but her words hit Nolan with the force of a verdict. His shoulders tensed and he shot her a quick look, hoping he misheard. She disappeared back into the office, leaving the hallway even quieter than before. Nolan turned to me fully now, eyes flickering with a mix of confusion, disbelief, and something bordering on panic. His voice, usually steady and rehearsed, came out scratchy. "Emery, please tell me you didn't post it." The desperation wrapped around his sentence like he was trying to keep it from shaking. I watched him struggle for breath, for control, for the upper hand he suddenly no longer had. "Post what, Nolan?" The calmness in my tone made him stiffen. It wasn't indifference, it was certainty, and he felt it. His Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed, but the words he wanted wouldn't form. His fingers tapped nervously against his thigh, a habit he'd never admit to having. A student walking past glanced between us before muttering under their breath, "Guess she's really going through with it?" Nolan jerked his head toward them, but the student kept walking, leaving him standing in the quiet with only his unraveling composure. When he faced me again, his expression didn't match the smirk he'd worn at the BBQ. This wasn't superiority anymore. It was fear disguised in fragments of pride he was trying and failing to hold together. His gaze drifted back to the locker door, then to my backpack, then to me. Each detail spelled out the same reality. I had moved on without waiting for anyone's approval, including his. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, to demand, to guilt anything that had always worked before, but none of those tools fit here anymore. For the first time, Nolan didn't look like the family's golden boy. He just looked lost, staring at a truth he never prepared for. I wasn't staying in the role they'd assigned me. He couldn't stop it, and we both knew that. To understand why Nolan reacted the way he did, you'd have to go back to one particular afternoon inside the school gym, an afternoon that exposed more than he ever intended. I was wiping down a treadmill when sharp, irritated voices echoed between the walls. Nolan stood near the weight racks with Ethan Doyle, and even from across the room, I could tell the conversation was spiraling. Nolan towered over him, accusing him of moving equipment he claimed he'd just set up. Ethan tried to explain, hands raised in a calm gesture, but Nolan's frustration flared. He stepped forward, pushing Ethan hard enough that the bench behind him rattled as he hit the floor. A few heads turned instantly. The entire gym paused for a beat. Nolan wasted no time twisting the story, insisting Ethan had been the aggressor. Then he pointed toward me, telling the coach that something I'd said earlier had set him off, as if my existence was enough to justify his temper. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself verbally. Instead, I walked to my bag, retrieved my phone, and opened the gym's corner camera feed I'd accessed through the student safety app. The angle captured everything with unforgiving clarity. When Principal Monroe arrived, I handed him the phone without commentary. He played the clip, watching Nolan push Ethan with no provocation whatsoever. Monroe didn't question me. He didn't ask Ethan for a secondary explanation. His decision was immediate and firm, delivered in a voice Nolan couldn't talk his way around. Nolan would be suspended for violating school conduct. The statement landed like a weight neither of us could ignore. Nolan's face shifted rapidly, anger, disbelief, then the faint recognition that someone other than him finally held control. That evening, once we got home, the conversation morphed into a lecture directed squarely at me. Dad paced near the counter, speaking with the tone he usually reserved for business calls he wanted to win. He insisted that Nolan's future was being jeopardized, and that public incidents like this could follow him for years. Mom added her own comments, not yelling but using guilt like it was second nature. She told me I needed to protect the family's reputation, that situations like this were delicate, and that I shouldn't have let things escalate. Their words slid together so seamlessly it sounded rehearsed. I stood there listening to phrases that were never said to Nolan, only to me. Don't embarrass the family again. Your brother's future is more fragile than you think. Try harder to keep things calm. They treated the truth like an inconvenience, something flexible, as long as Nolan stayed comfortable. He leaned against the hallway wall behind them, arms crossed, wearing a faint smirk that belonged to someone who believed consequences were optional. When my parents finally stepped away to finish dinner preparations, Nolan pushed himself off the wall and approached just close enough for me to hear him clearly. You know your place, right? His tone wasn't angry, it was condescending, quiet, almost casual, the kind of voice someone uses when they believe the hierarchy is already carved in stone. That was the moment something settled inside me, not fear, not shock, but clarity. The rules of the household were no longer ambiguous. No matter what evidence existed, no matter what Nolan did, I would always be expected to absorb the blame. And if I didn't start protecting myself with the same determination they protected him, I'd remain stuck in a role I never chose. I didn't answer Nolan. I didn't argue. I simply turned away, recognizing for the first time how little their narrative had to do with the truth and how much it depended on my silence. The next day, I walked into the counseling office with the quiet urgency of someone searching for air after holding their breath too long. Dana Willis looked up from her paperwork, and the moment our eyes met, she seemed to understand this wasn't a routine check-in. She motioned for me to sit, and as soon as I did, the words poured out in a low, steady stream about needing an escape that wasn't temporary. Dana listened without interrupting, hands folded, expression focused in a way that made me feel seen rather than evaluated. When I finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out a brochure for an out-of-state boarding school known for granting full academic scholarships to students who needed an environment built on stability. She explained the program clearly, listing everything it covered: tuition, housing, meals, travel, every cost removed if I qualified. The possibility stunned me for a moment. The idea of a life not dictated by fear or obligation felt almost unreal. When I stepped outside her office, I found Zoe Harper leaning against the lockers, waiting like she always did when she sensed something was wrong. I told her everything Dana had suggested, and before I could even process the information fully, Zoe took charge with a determination sharper than my own. She walked me to the library, spread out my folders on a table, and mapped out exactly what we needed: transcripts, certificates, recommendations, updated essays. She typed while I sorted scanned documents while I wrote, and reminded me repeatedly that none of this was too big for me to handle. Hours passed until the sun dipped, and I was back home alone in my room, with only the glow of the laptop lighting my face. The quiet around me felt heavy but focused, carrying the kind of intensity that comes only when you're working towards something that matters more than fear. My fingers moved slowly across the keys as I wrote about resilience, shaped by environments where truth was optional and appearances mattered more than accountability. I wasn't trying to sound dramatic. I was simply done pretending. When exhaustion started to settle in, I pulled up the number Dana had written on a sticky note earlier and called the attorney she recommended, Clyde Benson. His voice was calm, direct, the type that didn't waste time. I explained my situation as succinctly as I could, and he responded with the clarity of someone who knew the law intimately. According to state and federal education regulations, if I earned a full scholarship to a certified boarding institution and had passed the age threshold, he noted, I would be legally allowed to relocate without parental consent. Hearing that in plain terms steadied something inside me. Benson promised to send every relevant statute and guideline in writing within the hour, so I would have proof if anyone tried to dispute my rights. When I hung up, relief washed over me, slowly settling deeper with each breath. Later that night, Zoe stopped by to check on my progress, and together we reviewed every piece of the application one last time. When the moment came to submit it, my hand trembled, not from doubt, but from knowing this click would alter everything. Zoe rested her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You're really doing this. I'm proud of you." The words steadied me enough to press the button. The screen blinked once before confirming the submission, and the weight of that small notification felt almost overwhelming. After Zoe left, I sat in the stillness of my room and made a quiet decision. If I was truly going to rebuild my life somewhere else, I needed to remove any trace of myself from the place that never protected me. I would go to school the next morning, clear out my locker completely, and wait. Not with fear, but with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. The morning after everything had boiled over, I woke with a tension buzzing under my skin, the kind that told me something was waiting. When my phone vibrated, I glanced at the screen and froze at the bold subject line from the academy. I opened it slowly, reading each sentence twice, letting the words anchor themselves. Full merit scholarship, on-campus housing, meal plan, included travel, covered placement confirmed. A steady rush of clarity moved through me, not explosive, not dramatic, just final. I walked downstairs with the email still open, stepping into the kitchen where Patrick Doyle sipped coffee. Lillian Doyle arranged fruit on a plate, and Nolan Doyle leaned against the counter like he owned the morning. I set the phone on the island and turned the screen outward. No introduction, no explanation, just the truth in plain sight. Lillian's breath hitched before her hand found her chest, eyes widening in disbelief as the meaning registered. Patrick's eyebrows pulled together, the calm in his posture evaporating as he snatched the phone to read the message himself. Nolan stared like he couldn't quite connect the words on the screen with the person standing in front of him. Patrick lowered the phone slowly, anger tightening every line of his face as he demanded to know who gave me permission to apply. I didn't answer. Permission wasn't part of the equation anymore. He raised his voice, accusing me of making decisions behind the family's back, insisting that if I chose to leave, he would sever every form of financial support, no insurance coverage, no transportation help, no money. I told him in an even tone that my phone plan was already under my name and that my accounts were separate. His expression faltered for a split second, as if realizing the threat he thought he held had dissolved before he ever delivered it. Lillian sank into the nearest chair, tears spilling as she whispered about how families didn't abandon each other and how I was choosing a path that would break this home apart. Her voice trembled as if guilt might pull me back into place. Nolan stepped closer, jaw clenched, confusion simmering beneath the surface. He looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find a version of the story that kept him in control. Before anyone could try to rewrite the moment my phone rang, Clyde Benson's name flashed across the screen. I answered on speaker. Benson greeted me with professional calm and asked if my family was present. When I said yes, he laid out the legal details with sharp, unwavering clarity. He explained that with the scholarship awarded and my age meeting the requirement, I had full legal authority to relocate without parental approval. Any attempt to block my departure, interfere with transport, or withhold necessary documents would violate state and federal educational rights. His tone wasn't threatening, it was simply factual, which somehow made it more devastating. Patrick's face reddened as he clenched the edge of the counter, muttering that this wasn't how families handled disagreements. Lillian pressed her palms together like she was praying for the conversation to reverse itself. Nolan backed up a few steps, shoulders sinking, as he realized that none of the usual dynamics worked here. The system wasn't bending for him this time. When Benson finished outlining the final point of the statute, I thanked him and ended the call. The kitchen felt heavier than before, as if the air itself understood something irreversible had happened. Patrick tried one last push, insisting I was making an impulsive mistake. I met his eyes with a calm that surprised even me, and told him I wasn't reconsidering. His frustration, Lillian's heartbreak, Nolan's shock, all of it swirled around me, but none of it moved me. I stood there, steady, grounded, and absolutely certain of the choice I had already made. I slipped into my uniform for the final time, fastening each button with a quiet finality that settled over me as I headed toward campus under a morning that felt strangely lighter than any I had walked through before. Students filled the walkways as usual, but today the air felt charged. Conversations broke off and reformed as soon as they saw me, whispers threading between groups, with a cautious mix of disbelief and awe. "She's really leaving," someone breathed from behind me, followed by another voice speculating whether I had somehow forced the school to bend the rules. Yet none of the comments pulled my focus from the simple goal of getting through my last day without letting anyone twist my decision. I moved past lockers and crowded hallways until Nolan stepped into my path with abrupt precision, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment to reassert the authority he believed he still held. His expression carried a forced confidence that didn't reach his eyes, and when he demanded that I apologize to him before things got worse, it wasn't anger, I felt it was clarity. He insisted that my departure would stain the Doyle name, that I could still repair the damage by admitting fault, but his words slipped past me like they no longer belonged in my world. I told him calmly and without hesitation, "I don't owe you anything," and for the first time he didn't have a rehearsed retort ready. His voice rose, frustration sharpening as he called my choices dramatic and unnecessary, yet I stepped around him, continuing forward, without letting him dictate the rhythm of my steps. His protests dissolved behind me as I reached the administrative office, where Principal Monroe greeted me with a measured, genuine warmth that cut through the tension of the morning. She confirmed that everything was finalized, that my transfer date was set, and congratulated me in the steady tone of someone who respected self-advocacy, even when it came with collateral storms. She wished me well with sincerity, not pity, and the acknowledgement alone felt like a quiet validation I hadn't realized I needed. When I stepped back into the hallway, Zoe was waiting with two friends, their presence quiet but supportive in a way that didn't demand explanations. Zoe offered a soft smile that said more than any speech could, and we walked together toward the front entrance without crowding the moment with sentimentality. As we passed a cluster of students near the courtyard, one girl I barely recognized looked up from her notebook and said, "Good for you, Emery," with a certainty that struck deeper than any cheer or applause. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition, the kind that comes from seeing someone finally choose themselves. The campus around me, the noise, the benches, the familiar posters taped to the walls blurred at the edges, as if it were all quietly receding, making space for what came next. When I reached the gate, the sun angled across the pavement in a way that made the moment feel crisp and unrepeatable. I didn't pause to absorb the scene or look over my shoulder one last time. Nostalgia had no place in what I was doing. I stepped beyond the entrance with a steady breath, letting the door of that life close behind me without ceremony, without regret, and without giving anyone permission to pull me back into a role I no longer accepted. Time moved forward in ways I never expected, and the life I built for myself gradually settled into something steady, something earned. After finishing my years at the boarding school, I pushed through college with a determination that felt sharper than ambition. It was survival, turning into direction. I worked campus jobs, interned during summers, and surrounded myself with people who didn't expect me to shrink to make space for them. When I graduated, I accepted a position with a nonprofit in California that focused on supporting students navigating unstable or hostile home environments, work that felt personal without consuming me. My days were filled with outreach meetings, policy discussions, and school visits, each one grounding me in a future I shaped intentionally. My apartment was small, a cozy place on the second floor of an older building, but it was mine, and the quiet there belonged to me in a way nothing ever had before. I adopted a rescue dog from a shelter during my second year in California, a shy mix with a crooked ear who eventually decided I was trustworthy enough to follow from room to room. We found our rhythm: morning walks before work, slow weekends, occasional beach trips when I needed a reminder that life could be gentle. Updates from my old town came sporadically through Zoe, who understood the boundaries I drew and never pushed them. Her texts arrived every few months, short and factual. She told me Nolan's athletic scholarship fell apart after a combination of inconsistent performance and a minor injury, something that wouldn't have been catastrophic for a more disciplined athlete, but hit him hard. Without that scholarship, tuition costs mounted faster than his pride could adapt. To keep up, he started working part-time at a sporting goods store, stocking shelves after lectures, and learning what it meant to be corrected by a manager who didn't care about family names or reputations. None of it was dramatic, just the simple math of adulthood meeting someone who had always assumed the world would flex around him. As for my parents, Zoe's messages described a slow tightening of their finances, not a collapse, just a shift. They scaled back trips, postponed upgrades to the house, and began budgeting in ways they had never needed to before. Their lives continued predictable and unchanged in most ways, except for the absence of the future they once planned out loud as if it were fact. Zoe never framed the updates with judgment. She simply relayed them with a kind of quiet loyalty that respected both my distance and her honesty. When I read her messages, I didn't feel satisfaction or guilt, just a detached understanding that choices have consequences, even for people who spent years denying that simple truth. My own routines grew more solid each month. I paid my rent with money I earned, filed my taxes, balanced my schedule, and created a life that didn't require anyone's approval. Evenings were calm, cooking simple meals, answering emails from students I mentored, watching my dog circle once before settling beside me. I realized gradually that peace wasn't loud or dramatic. It was built from ordinary days where I decided what happened next. Nothing about my life relied on the Doyle household anymore. The distance wasn't the result of anger, it was the natural outcome of choosing myself in a place where no one else had ever encouraged me to. California didn't fix me, it simply gave me the room to rebuild without interference. And as the years layered themselves into a new normal, I understood that the freedom I fought for had become something quiet, steady, and entirely mine. The message came in just as I was finishing up a late report, the subject line sitting at the top of my screen with a kind of quiet insistence. "Come home for Thanksgiving." I stared at it for a moment, letting the question hang in the air without opening anything yet. The room still except for the soft hum of my dog shifting against the couch. When I finally clicked into the email, the words were short, almost cautious, as if Nolan was writing to someone he wasn't sure he had a place with anymore. He said the family would like me there, that we could talk, that maybe things were different now. My finger hovered above the reply button long enough to feel the weight of the moment, but not long enough to give it power. I closed the laptop slowly, the click gentle and final. There was nothing cruel in the choice. It simply didn't belong to him anymore. I clipped on my dog's leash and stepped outside the California evening, settling over the street like a soft blanket. The sun had dipped low, leaving the sky brushed with the last streaks of color, and the quiet felt like a language I'd finally learned to understand. As we walked, I didn't replay the message or imagine what I would have said. The absence of anger wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. Healing wasn't about returning. It was about recognizing which doors didn't need to be reopened, even when someone knocked politely. Every step reminded me how much of my life I had built with my own hands, piece by piece, far from the noise that once made me think I had to shrink to fit into someone else's version of family. Back then, I thought staying silent kept the peace, but distance taught me that peace doesn't come from being small. It comes from finally choosing yourself. Out here, no one expected me to make myself responsible for someone else's comfort. No one asked me to protect egos or absorb blame. I didn't owe explanations to people who only questioned my voice when it challenged theirs. Walking under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt something settle inside me, not triumph, not bitterness, just the understanding that stepping away had given me the space to grow into someone I actually recognized. My dog trotted ahead, glancing back with the easy trust of a creature who knew I wasn't going anywhere I didn't want to be. I followed, breathing in the cool air, letting the present moment stretch comfortably around me. I didn't need anyone to validate the distance I'd chosen, and I didn't need to justify the silence I maintained. Some endings don't require dramatic closure. They just require the courage to stop participating in a story that was never written for you. Protecting myself had never been selfish. Choosing peace had never been abandonment, and refusing to go back wasn't punishment, it was freedom. I reached the end of the block and turned toward home, the sky fading into deeper shades as the last light slipped over the horizon. I didn't check my phone when I walked inside. I didn't feel tempted. The message would sit there unanswered, and that silence would say everything I needed it to. My life moved forward without hesitation, and that was the only answer anyone would ever get from me. Peace wasn't loud. It was simply choosing not to return to the place that taught you to question your worth. And I chose peace fully, finally, completely. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.